Contagion, State, Civil Society and Identity Entanglement, moderated by Professor Prema Rajagopalan of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. Let me take this opportunity to introduce the speakers. Debopriya Roy, a research scholar at the Department of Mass Communication and Journalism, Tezpur University, Assam, will be presenting her paper titled Decoding the Fear of Contagion, Domestic Workers and COVID-19 Pandemic. Following her, Achuyt Krishna Hazarika, a master's student at the Hindu College, University of Delhi, and Manish Upadhyay, a master's student at the Venkateswara College, University of Delhi, will be jointly presenting their paper titled Community Response to Plague, Reflections on the Past Plague Contagions in Bengal and Assam between 1892 and 1940s. Panelists will be given 15 minutes to present the paper. Panelists who would like to present a presentation to the audience, please inform your moderator and you will be given presenter access. After the completion of all panelists, the moderator will ask their questions, followed by questions from the members of the panel, followed by members of the audience through the chat box. The session will conclude with the closing remarks by the moderator. The session is recorded for archival purposes. Use of derogatory or offensive language is strictly prohibited and will attract strict actions. I now leave the floor to Professor Prema Rajagopalan to moderate the panel Contagion, State, Civil Society and Identity Entanglement.
Okay, thank you for this very nice brief introduction on the panel and the panelists for this session of your conference. So it's nice to see youngsters, whatever the pandemic, you are still enthusiastic in presenting or sharing your research. So the rules of the session have already been outlined. So I now invite, as you have mentioned, Ms. Debopriya Roy to make her presentation in about 20 minutes. Since we have only two papers, I think it is possible to stretch for 20 minutes for each paper, and then be to the point and try to highlight your main arguments. I think this is part of your ongoing PhD research, since I understand that you are a PhD scholar. So it will be interesting to hear from you how you see this concept of social distance having a caste connotation as well in the time of the pandemic. So Debopriya Roy, the floor is yours. You can start your presentation. Now, what should I do? You said that I should give permission, or you will take care of it. That if she wants to show a screen, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. I want to share a screen.
Yeah. So you can.
It's is my screen visible right now?
Yes, sure. It is visible.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debopriya Roy, and I should say two things before starting the paper. First is that I'm really sorry that my webcam has stopped working this morning, so I cannot turn on the video. And secondly, this paper is not related to exactly what I'm doing as a part of my PhD, but through the months of May, I had gotten chance to interact with the area that the domestic workers from the area that I come from, and it somehow shocked me to to experience that whatever they were experiencing initially. As when I was writing the paper, I was using that ethnographical method. Again, I had to stop using that because of I had a hardware crash. And anyway, I will still stick to my argument, which is based on some literature reviews that I've done in the past years. I hope the screen is visible. So The ideas of purity and pollution lays the foundation of untouchability in Indian experience, which formulates prejudiced behaviors against domestic workers in the Indian upper and middle class domestic space. Well, the terminology of the workers in domestic space, especially the terminology of the paid workers in the domestic space, went under an evolution from servant to domestic help, dropping the discriminatory connotations of the former. The social security of the workers witnessed no change whatsoever. The domestic space of the middle to high income household is still sustained by the labor of working class people. However, the right to inhabit that space along with the financial security was denied soon after the COVID-19 lockdown was announced in 2020. Though the disease was brought in the country by the economically privileged strata, people were more afraid of contamination from their domestic workers rather than their social peers. The privileged classes' reaction to the pandemic resulted in worsening of the domestic workers' working conditions, let alone the woes caused by the pandemic. Now, drawing on the intertwined relationship, contagion, and class, this paper will attempt to delve into how the privileged classes' practice of social distancing and preventive measures in domestic work scenario is rooted in caste-based system of untouchability. Now, the changing pattern of the changing pattern of the labor market participation by Indian women did not transform the patriarchal gender division of domestic work. Now, globally, an average of 75, I cite this from a McKinsey data. Globally, an average of 75% of the world's total unpaid care work is done by women, which include cooking, cleaning, and childcare. We have an NSS report that says that Indian women spend 299 minutes of unpaid of time every day by doing unpaid work. Now, what happens is that the shared understanding of family as an institution built on care and love, grounded on women's sacrifice and selflessness, seldom offers a glance into the labor that works behind making that institution sustain and thrive. This feminization of labor has resulted in the devaluation of domestic work. The culture of considering this work as an essence of womanhood prohibits it to count skilled work. Women in their patriarchal and gender roles are supposed to do all this happily and naturally. It's a part of their, identity. Now, with the work considered insignificant and largely invisible, and no framework for valuation leads to discrimination in wages. The growing literature in the area demonstrates how the absence of legal framework affects the working condition of prominent issues like insufficient payment and health hazards and workplace harassment, including sexual exploitation, no right to minimum wage, etc. The notion of not considering this space as a workspace carves the rights of the worker, leaving them at the mercy of employer. Pandemic intensified these prevalent issues and put them in an absolute crisis. In a survey done on 79 domestic workers from cities like Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Pune, in the second phase of lockdown in 2020, 44% respondents got a declined amount of pay in March. Other surveys also reflect the same results. And the withholding of public transportation, which is the prime reason for migrant crisis, affected the domestic workers as well. Because the special segregation of the part-time domestic workers are the people who comes to the employer's house at a certain time, and then they'll return to their own home, mostly, which is there is a special segregation between the people who employs domestic worker and where the domestic worker lives. So what happened that they could not travel to their employer's residence, and they faced some worst humanitarian crisis. And again, as a lot of them are women, there are uh, a lot of them had to suffer the usual gendered exploitation that was growing in during the uh, pandemic. I will go to the next slide. Now, this is a screenshot of an advertisement by Kent Atta Maker. In this advertisement, there was a message that, "Are you allowing your maid to knead atta dough by hand? Choose Kent Atta and Bread Maker for hands-free kneading of the dough. Let automation take care of hygiene this time. Don't compromise on health and purity." The fact is that this is apparently an harmless message. This is harmless because whenever we see something on the screen, our idea of hygiene doesn't let us to think that there is something wrong in the screen. And this is not a discrete discrimination of class prejudiced COVID-19 prevention practice. The panic and the paranoia in the early days of pandemic has to move with the classist and casteist prejudices than with scientific temperament. Like whatever, if that person has washed her hands before after before kneading the atta, how can that be infected? How can the hands of the person who is by profession a worker is always infected? And why do we always look at them with that kind of suspicion? The non-consideration of class factor of COVID with casted fear of purity and pollution formulated the basis for COVID-19 practices and precautions. And this is not about this advertisement only. This advertisement was withdrawn and the company has apologized, but it was it was impacting several policies and aid systems as well. Even long after the months of first wave of COVID-19, domestic workers have faced difficulties returning to their workplace, that is their employer's home. There was an incident in Gurugram where they were, going through stages of phone interviews, Zoom interviews, a thorough medical history checkup, RT-PCR test to get hired. And again, this is not an exceptional incident. There was certain apartment societies which are making it a reason that the domestic workers should get themselves tested, should get an RT-PCR test to get hired. And even other than the normal citizen, the administrative regulations and policies were instructing the domestic workers to get tested in every 14 days in Maharashtra and Bangalore. The administrative the domestic workers were getting tested in domestic workers, drivers and other maids were getting tested every 14 days in Maharashtra. In Bangalore, the Bangalore Mahanagara Palike asked domestic helpers to undergo an RT-PCR test every 14 days. And however, what is interesting to note that while the maids were asked to tasted, and there was no clarity that who will bear the cost and the consequences of testing if it comes positive. And what is more interesting to note is that while the maids were asking to get tested, there were almost no such regulation for the employers to get tested every 14 days to avoid the workers' susceptibility to the virus. Now, what is, I think it's almost a blatant practice of classism that the people who can afford domestic workers, who can afford to pay someone to get their chores done, they are susceptible from the virus. They are susceptible from the virus from their workers, but the workers are not susceptible to the virus from them. And this kind of preventive practices is not new to Indian experiences. It is a colonial phenomena. Like when the bubonic plague breakout, there was the preventive policies taken introduced by British colonial. It was prejudiced against the common masses. The Europeans and the elites are completely exempted from the quarantine back then, which is I just recall that thing here. Again, so I'm going to my next slide. And there was an incident which is again not a discrete incident. Two men in an isolation center in Kushinagar district in Uttar Pradesh, they used to travel to their homes daily from meals from their quarantine center because the cook at the quarantine center belonged to scheduled caste community. And this kind of incident kept happening during the initial days of COVID-19, when people were asked to go to the quarantine center to stay if they have a travel history or something like that. But it kind of made headlines during the pandemic. And it would be wrong to think that this practice is confined to villages only. It's widespread among the domestic work culture of India. Now, lurking under the idea of hygiene, casteism limits the Brahmins and other upper caste women to the task of cooking, while cleaning and waste collection are done by Dalits and scheduled caste people. Employers do not recruit the caste group who was supposed to clean the human feces for cooking. Now, their rationale is that it's a hygiene concern. That's a flawed argument. How can a person who has never cleaned any toilet contaminate any disease just because of their ancestor profession? The nature of domestic workers makes them contagious or unsanitary. That kind of generates a new lease of untouchability that the workers experiences. And somewhat as now I think the more though the lower the still the scheduled class and obc people are formulating the majority of the domestic workforce, but still we have labeled kind of it's with the profession. The obsession of purity has perhaps become the factor behind treating the entire tribe of domestic workers almost equally as untouchables. And this is not just restricted to the this is not just restricted to division of work. The use of separate utensils for workers, denied entry to employers toilets, citing hygiene and toilet literacy issues, separate sitting arrangement on the floor for eating, separate entry to apartments or house for work, asking cooks to change clothes before entering the kitchen. These are all pre-pandemic phenomenon in Indian experience. So we just cannot say that it broke out during pandemic only. It was there. A study conducted by National Council of Applied Economic Research and the University of Maryland, US, in 2014 showed how 1 in every 4 Indians admitted to practicing untouchability. 27% of the respondents from 42,000 households across India admitted practicing untouchability. Interestingly, the respondents denied practicing untouchability when asked directly. However, they were asked if it would be okay for a scheduled caste person to enter their kitchen or touch their utensil or use their utensils, and then the answer was a big no. This is what happens in urban India, where people do not openly rationalize caste-based untouchability, fearing political incorrectness, but it gets well reflected in certain practices and behaviors, which I'm going to elaborate more in the next slide. In the and this politics of social distancing, which maybe we are hearing the word social distancing more in the pandemic era, but the politics of social distancing is an integral factor of India's caste system. Ambedkar's negotiation of caste considers Brahmins to be the first group of people to introduce the process of social distancing. I cite from Ambedkar, at some time in the history of the Hindus, the priestly class socially detached itself from the rest of the body of people through a closed-door policy, became a caste by itself. Now, the upper caste people were paranoid of becoming impure even by the shadow of the untouchables that we know. And this happened in the initial days of the pandemic, when the first lockdown started. People started confining them to their houses. Urban people started confining them to their houses. They were shopping online. I think everything was stopped almost. People are more keen to use private transport than public transport. Public transport was halted, and the workers on whose labor this entire city space was running on, they suddenly, like, they lost the right to inhabit that space. They were left. And this is not a thing about migrant laborers only. This was equally true for the people who works inside the home. They could not go to their workspace. They were denied entry and all. And this fear of impurity and the segregated living is very prominent in conventional Indian social life, where some upper caste people even use where the most of the Indian villages and cities reflect a residential segregation based on caste. the segregation results sorry the segregation results in Dalits to be living mostly on the outskirts of the villages with little and no right to the public place. The segregation resulted in Dalits to be living mostly on the outskirts of the villages with little and no right to public space like drinking water, wells, and school. The apparent social system has evolved undeniably, but the fear of contamination resulting in untouchability in older times still lurks deep in our urban, space. Because in a paper titled "Isolated by Caste: Neighborhood Scale Residential Segregation in Indian Metros," published by IIM Bangalore, about 80% of Rajkot's localities, 60% of Kolkata's localities had no Dalit inhabitants. This kind of segregation is a instance of new modes of untouchability, we can say. How it impacts the domestic workers, that I can elaborate next, is that the domestic workers are often denied the use of elevators in high rise buildings. Sometimes they have these strictly separate lifts, and there I think three pictures are visible on my screen. At the extreme left, there is a picture from a high-rise building at Hyderabad, where the maids and the drivers and the delivery boys were asked to use the service lift, and if they did not, they were charging 300 rupees fine. The next two are again and the next two are from somewhere in New Delhi. And this kind of incidents, though the residents in different newspaper interviews have time and again claimed that this is a pandemic phenomena, they and the resident the people who are residing in those buildings and their white collar guests might get affected from the delivery boys or the maids. But it is a it is a way it is a thing that is not very new to urban planning or urban sensibilities. Just 10 years after the untouchability was legally abolished, a 20-story building in Mumbai had a separate lift for the use of servants. This is, I think, the first instance of, I'm not sure, but this is, I think, the first instance of having a service lift in the buildings. The idea of service lift, which is used for the carriage of goods and to segregate the servants and delivery boy from the white collar residents and visitor, is now an integral feature of luxury living in contemporary urban real estate. Has been a is now it's a phenomena. So what can I would like to conclude the paper with saying that domestic workers are stuck between the invisibility of the work done and the absence of considering house as a workplace. Now, denied from the legal right and other social security, they are left at their employer's mercy. Now, beyond this gendered most of exploitation, they face the discrimination and rejuvenated forms of untouchability rooted in rampinical sensibilities. Like there is often different utensils there for domestic workers. There is often different soaps or soap material that is kept for the domestic workers, which only they will use. They are denied from touching the any like from going into the good toilet of the employer's house. They have to struggle with that. And this shift from but however there is a shift from considering some people has been born contagious, which is a caste phenomena, to some people whose work makes them filthy, is undeniably ruling the privileged urban domestic work scenario. Like previously it was the case that some people are like borning into caste, which I feel is that has been changed slightly. Now whenever we are talking about domestic workers, the privileged people's practice of doing anything, because we do not check now who is working as it is undeniable that the division of labor is still there, but the domestic workers are considered as if I consider the domestic worker as a one unity one united group, then their work has somehow the work is somehow seen as to be contagious, and that creates these new forms of untouchability. Now, and from crime to disease, the worker have to deal with the continuous doubt of the employers, and understanding this new lease of untouchability, which surpasses the boundaries of caste, sometimes to fit into the matrix of capitalist power relations, can be the first step towards that. Again, battling against the political correctness of the people who do not conform to the casteist ideology openly but practices untouchability in domestic space is very difficult, because as these exploitations are prevalent in a space which is fundamentally different from the mainstream idea of workspace, preventing any exploitation, including untouchability, lands us in a contested place. And as a mode of suggestion, as the growing literature in the area suggests that a need for defined legal and ethical framework implemented throughout the nation, the advocacy for anti-untouchability undoubtedly needs more space in the narrative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debopriya. That was an interesting perception of
Thank you so
seeing
much.
class stratification as manifesting new forms of whatever social distancing or purity pollution concepts. We will have, I think, questions and discussions after both the papers are presented, so that the other paper presenters also have the equal time, 20 minutes or so. Is that okay?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Are you ready? The presenters, Achuyt, Krishna, are you ready? You said you had a
Yes,
technical problem. Are you ready
Yes,
now?
yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Now,
Yeah,
yes,
Achuyt
yes,
and
please.
Manish. Yeah, yeah,
Manish
Yes,
is
ma'am.
going to present the paper.
yeah.
Please proceed.
Sure.
Okay, am I audible? Will you confirm once?
Yes, yes, yes. I can hear you very well.
Okay,
Yes,
ma'am.
Manish, go ahead.
So the topic for our paper is the community's response to the plague of 1896 to 1940, and how in Bengal and Assam the plague was not as prevalent as in other parts of India. I would like to begin by pointing out that plague of Justinian in 541 to 42 CE caused the deaths of millions of people. Same was true for the plague during 1347 to 52, which caused the death for 20 to 25 million people, which later came to be known as Black Death. But when seen in the pretext of 1892 to 1940s plague in India, we see that despite killing over 10 million people all over India, this plague killed only a few in Bengal and Assam. In fact, in 1936, Assam reported almost no cases of this plague, except for a few instances in during 1902 to 4, which were mainly attributed to the exodus of a few cases of plague from Calcutta. So, because of such an interesting finding and facts, we decided to pursue that what might have been the reason for this strange and miraculous phenomena that despite being one of the darkest provinces and having very limited resources to fight the plague or to have a structure to accurately limit the spread of the plague, this community of Bengal and Assam successfully did that. The objective of our study is to highlight the varied community response, the awareness and perception built up around these parts, and how these help the people in restricting the spread of plague in later phases. The methodology used for our paper was the qualitative and analytical method of research based on both primary and secondary sources, which contains review of relevant literature, minutes of proceedings of the committees, archival records, and medical geography. This is in detail in the mentioning of bibliography at the end of every page of our research. Our paper begins with giving a brief description of various variants of plague which occurred in India. Then we highlight the extent of outbreak. Like in Calcutta, there were a total of 20 epidemic waves, out of which 4 reached their peaks in March, 12 in April, and the rest in May. S. Lata Chatterjee says that the only possible clue as to how the infection might have been introduced in Bengal was a large consignment of mustard seed in gunny bags that had arrived. The history of plague in this province shows that while a number of pneumonic cases of plague imported into the province gave rise to small epidemics of the disease, only a very few cases of bubonic plague were recorded. However, we have reason to believe that the pneumonic cases came to the notice of the authorities mainly because of the epidemics associated with them. And many cases of bubonic plague were imported into the province but were not recorded because they were not connected with epidemics. This is more probable when we remember that only about 300 cases of plague in India are of the pneumonic type, and not we cannot witness a very elaborate precaution being taken to register these cases. And thus we conclude that plague infection was frequently brought into the province, and there were definite reasons for the disease not becoming endemic. We believe that there were three main reasons for the limited spread of plague in Bengal province. First was the scarcity of rats in houses. We based this conclusion on the findings where it is stated that the number of rats which the rat which was causing the spread of the plague was termed as Emeratus, and these rats caught in every 100 traps. They were the commission of the English people who did this study set up 100 traps in various towns, and out of the 100 traps set in Dhaka town and in other towns in the villages of eastern Bengal and Assam visited by this commission, the number of rats which were caught were about 2 in Jatrabari and Dilaburg to about 10 in Dhaka and Chittaung, which is very few. So in Bhagalpur, which is the nearest plague infected town to eastern Bengal, as many as 34 emeritus were caught in every 100 traps set. So you can see the difference that despite having 34 emeritus, 34 infected rats being caught, it was still a very low number when we compare this finding with the other parts of India. Second feature could be attributed to the physical features of the province, which protect it to some extent from the imports of infection. For explaining this, I would like to point out that the infected centers were separated from the province by intervening plague-free areas and the Ganges River. And although communication by rail with infected centers existed, it was interrupted by the great rivers. Roads were few and often in different character. Though traveling by the rivers was easy, it was slow. Extensive floods during many months of the year still further interrupted free communication between village and village and individual homesteads. Third reason was that the villages consisted of scattered hamlets built on raised mounds of earth, which were spread over an extensive area, so that even if plague broke out among the rats in a village the village infection could only be spread through human agency. These rats in one part of the village being cut off from the rats of another part, the distance was so vast that it was very highly unlikely that these two rats will spread the infection. The abundant rainfalls, ample water supply, and fertile soil prevented famines, so that the people rich in comparison with other parts of India had sufficient crops, and they had enough crops to meet their immediate needs. And they did not need to import any grains from the other parts of India, and the only flow of grain was in the outward direction. Then we would like to highlight the role of community response in limiting the spread of this plague. Firstly, we would like to draw the attention to the daily habits of the people. A striking characteristic of the Bengalis is their neatness and tidiness, especially when compared with the inhabitants of other parts of India. This habit pertains not only to their person but extends to their house and their surroundings. Even within simple matting hubs of the village, one can see pillows, bottles, lamps, utensils, and other articles of daily use being neatly hung up in a symmetrical manner on the walls. After sweeping and cleaning out the house in the morning, nothing unnecessary appears to be left on the floor. We are unable to say that how far this habit is related to their experience derived from the floods, which mostly penetrates the houses during the rainy seasons. However, it is still a very peculiar feature which is only seen in this part of the country. Secondly, the structure of their houses also played a major role in restricting access of rats to the house. Whether intuitively or otherwise, the Bengalis seem to have adopted a method of house construction which succeeds in practically eliminating rats from their house, be the house a pakka or kacha one. Pakka houses being built of stone, brick or mortar, often with concrete roof from the very nature of the materials used in their construction, could afford little harborages for rats. These animals may, however, affect an entrance from outside, either through the floor or by the door. Many Bengali houses have been constructed in such a way that they their construction is in their construction is inherent an idea that they have to prevent rats from getting into the house even before the pandemic. And to do this, they have plinths erected with a brick or masonry facing along with the upper border of a bead of varying depth, which projects about 4 to 6 inches more over the base. This floor is made of a layer of concrete faced with hard polished cement, which is a layer foot deep of dry earth. The kacha houses too afford little shelter for rats, being constructed out of thin bamboo matting or wattle covered with a thin layer of mud. The walls afford no shelter for these rodents. The roofs too, being made of corrugated iron, split bamboo, or thin grass thatch, fail to shelter these animals. Perhaps one of the most noteworthy features of this building and in this province is the almost complete absence of tiled roofs, which are so more commonly seen in many other parts of India. Even the houses, which are built of mud here, differ from those seen in other places. The walls of mud houses in other parts of India are made of such a thickness that rats find ample room to make their burrows within them, and it is a very habitable place which they make for themselves. They make a warm, sheltered home. I'm talking about the rats, and they find a very close proximity to their food supply, which is always abundantly found within the home. And this is how the house end up being infected by the rats. But in the case of Eastern Bengal and Assam, as highlighted above, this was not the case. It is very difficult for the rat to go inside a pakka house, and even inside the kacha houses, it is evident that their structure was in conjunction with the habits of the people, and scarcity of rats in their dwellings are the main reasons for the freedom of provinces from the plague. I would like to conclude my paper by saying that through this paper, me and my partner have tried to find out why, even when the rest of India was suffering from the plague, Bengal and Assam were relatively free from its effects. We found that due to community efforts, Amratas found comparatively low chances to move into the houses. The habits of people in respect for their greater regard for neatness and tidiness, both in and around their dwellings, diminished the food supply of the rodents. The structure and design of the Bengali home, whether it was of solid masonry type on the one hand or of the filmy matting or grass type on the other, afforded little shelter for the rats. Thus the province of Bengal, especially region of Eastern Bengal and Assam, sustained the plague contagions and built a strong deterrence, which evidently became effective in the later attacks. Thank you.
Have you finished, Manish?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of time. I have a couple of quick observations on both the papers before I open it to the floor for questions.
Okay,
So,
ma'am.
yeah. So the first one on um, domestic servants. Generally,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
mean, I have a sociology background. Yeah, Devapriya, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
Yeah. So we always say that, disasters of any kind, man-made or natural disasters, are an opportunity to get over a traditional system of stratification called caste. And we do have some research that is done where sometimes it does happen. They say a tragedy should be converted to an opportunity to, what you may say, suppress these kind of barriers that are caused by caste. Like you narrated, traditional settings, village settings are socially distanced, even in terms of you can say building those hamlets, and they are caste based settlements. But what your paper tries to argue, that traditional system of stratification called caste is in a sense reinforced, or it reappears in a different form, legitimized by a traditional system of social distancing. It's an interesting perception. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, and whether the data is probably, maybe, I don't know, largely urban based in cities, domestic servants in cities. We have to see, because always, we do have research that talks about how the community has come together, especially in times of pandemic. That also we see. So whether this is more an urban phenomena, or whether we can try and see how it can be scaled for observation, how we can look for
Yes, ma'am.
legitimization of, and very nicely put, you said that it's not servant, it's domestic work, but that does not take away the identity. And also, we know about this intersectionality where gender and caste interweave in order to whatever make them doubly deprived. So women are always at the receiving end. So I don't know whether this is part of your, as you say, it's not part of your mainstream research for the PhD degree, but it's an
No.
interesting observation which I hope that somebody will take it up in a more detailed way. So you have thrown up some insights for future research, though these observations cannot be conclusive. More data and more ethnographic details, or data with the greater depth, can tell us a little more, can tell us a little more. And in some sense, I can connect also, like about, I remember when we had this uh, newer apartments coming in IIT campus. I was on that committee, and then they said that the old design of the houses is very Brahminical. They did have some of those old structures existing even today, have separate entrance for servants. So it's behind an apartment complex, or it's a separate door within a house where servants enter and then unnoticed go towards the back, and then they do their job, whether it is in the kitchen or whether it is washing and cleaning of the house. They don't enter through the main door. So one of the observations was to uh, the new apartments that were designed to have just one entry door, one lift, where everybody can use and everybody can kind of and not go through this kind of maybe social stigmatization. So we do have phases, but that it reappears in modern buildings is something that is quite surprising, especially in a city like Bombay, where Bombay is supposed to be the whatever, um, the first modern city kind of in the in India. So anyway, that's an interesting observation. On the
Thank you, ma'am.
second paper again, so one is more contemporary, the other is a historical reconstruction of Contagion. One is based on how people are treated as carriers, sometimes asymptomatic carriers, and therefore they are kept away. And its impact and implications. The second paper is another interesting observation where you reconstruct the past. And what really struck me was, again, I do work in built environment and society. So you talked about the very structure, the way in which it is constructed. That's why sometimes we say in the past, using local materials and maybe certain kinds of designs and materials also help them to kind keep away from not only floods but also these kind of pests. And whether
Yes.
that kind of vulnerability influences lifestyle habits of the people, that is also important
Exactly.
correlation, an interesting correlation. But let me tell you, Manish, I remember some years ago there was this pan-Indian study that came around looking at, before all these smart cities and tier 2 cities, all these projects came. So, slums are always a sore for the planner, urban slums. And I remember one of them telling, oh, South Indian slums are quite clean. So we may also have some remnants of that kind of lifestyle habits. So it's, when you immediately think of a slum, you think about it as a dirty, organic, uh, and very, very, haphazard settlement, and the people also not really using the space effectively. But I do remember some members of the panel commenting that slums in South India are also comparatively clean. They do maintain it. So maybe there are certain natural, you can say, disasters that they faced, and they want to survive that. And therefore, like you said, talk about floods. So the lifestyle habits of the people, which gets ingrained in culture over generations, also help them to prevent the spread of maybe disease like plague. And now, of course, everywhere they say,
Yes.
whenever there's a cleaning of places, cleaning the places, you don't want garbage dumped, you don't want garbage thrown here, there. So sanitation, hygiene is one of the first, what we may say, parameters that is addressed as soon as some kind of health hazard is foreseen. So when it is built into the culture of living of certain communities, they don't have much to kind of worry about. And if that is the argument that you are bringing, three reasons you said, which may have helped them. So your primary data, you cannot go and interview those people who were there. So what do you mean by your primary data? It's basically based on historical records, isn't it? Or maybe you have
Exactly.
interviewed uh, you have interviewed some
Few of
whatever
relevant literature also.
literature. So most of your data is based on archives and literature. It's you cannot go and
Exactly.
meet people. But whether that has also been manifested in other things like dengue and malaria, of course, is now very common, other infectious diseases. So recently we had a thesis in the department which talks about, I mean, same thing, where infectious diseases attack very quickly, whether these spaces can be, and all, of course, the student talked about even social networks which help them to contain these epidemics. So her space was the state of Kerala. So that can also be a very interesting causal reason for the spread and control of infectious diseases on the health front. I'm sure you will have a lot. I don't. Is this part of your PhD research? I mean, MA research, MA dissertation, if you're
No,
doing?
no, ma'am. No, ma'am. No. No.
Okay, this is just out of
It was
interest.
just of keen
Mm.
interest, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. So that's interesting. Try and strengthen the papers, both of you, and uh, publish somewhere. I'm sure you will get people giving more meaningful comments who worked in those domains from history and from communication.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay? Yeah. So
Sure,
all
ma'am.
the best to all the
Thank you.
presenters in all your academic endeavors. Now I would
Thank you
like
so
to
much.
open the floor, the audience, if they want to ask any questions, if they have any comments, if they have anything else to share. Yeah. Is there
Yes, please.
anything
Thank
that
you.
you want to tell me?
No, ma'am. No, as of now.
No, I see somebody on the screen. Any queries? Any comments? What comments? What observations? Tejaswini is an organizer.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what do we do? I mean, this is the order, isn't it? So if people want to ask questions.
We can welcome some questions from
Yeah,
audience, ma'am.
yeah. I've told them we don't have many people in the audience. Um, if we remove the presenters, we just have about 10, 11. That's fine. So if you have anything to comment, clarify, there seems to be a lot of silence. This is Manish, is it? Nice to see your face. Manish or Achuyt, you have anything to talk about the other paper? Achuyt?
Yes, ma'am. In the conclusion part, the presenter has mentioned about the difference between uh, the born and the occupation. Someone born with the level of contagious, and the someone later uh, is labeled as contagious with the occupation. But if we see the occupation issues, the common thing, someone from that category born out as contagious tend to choose that those occupations.
I cannot hear
Hence, we
anything.
can see if we can. Okay. In the conclusion, in the first conclusion, that you have made the conclusion that there are two set of people. One is born out as contagious, and the second one is they are labeled as contagious because of their occupation. So if we see the past history and present in terms of the present scenario as well, those who come from the contagious segments tend to take the occupations of that contagious, which are labeled as contagious. So I don't see a different set of like
I think I have some
persons
network
who are
issues. I cannot hear you clearly.
He is trying to tell
am I
you.
audible to others?
He's trying to tell you that people who are born in the lower caste tend to choose those occupations, but that hereditary
Those
calling, that
occupations of domestic
line
workers,
is kind of broken now with lot of affirmative action. And you do find in cities, I mean, especially I know for the city of Chennai, when the first Onyx came, you have a uniform and then it looks like a corporate job. So everybody is willing because it's not that dirty. You clean the streets, but then you wear your gloves, and then you have those long brooms, and you have now, especially what we have is electric vehicles with different waste boxes for segregated waste. It doesn't, and anybody who is unemployed or who is unskilled are applying for those jobs. So that is breaking some of these traditional caste occupation continuity and nexus.
Okay.
So
Okay.
others are taking. So it is in that context she is saying that anybody, I mean, if you don't, especially migrants who move to the city, unskilled, they're not necessarily the lowest of the lowest caste, and then they come, but what is the job, especially for women, that is easily available is domestic service. And in their traditional village they say that we are the upper caste even. But here in a city, that identity is suppressed, submerged. They don't mind doing domestic servants. And also, I find so that urban people, we don't ask for a caste, but sometimes indirectly we find how neat they are, what their habits are, and things like that. But because of that new job, domestic service, which they will not do back in their village, which they will not do back in
Yes.
their village. Here, it gets a different kind of a color. And especially
Okay.
during the pandemic, and keeping them away. And then, though people were given at least a request to pay them half the salary, not deprive them of anything, it's not that everybody did, whether they came or not. Some of us did. We did understand they live far away, they cannot come, there is no public transport, and everybody in the house was losing their jobs. So some of us did pay them, did all the work by
Okay.
ourselves. But that was
Mhm.
I would say, an opportunistic reason also to fire them, to get rid of them
Mhm.
permanently. So, and also keeping them away and asking them to go through these RT-PCR tests. That's quite traumatic. And of course, government,
Yes, ma'am.
they do, it's free, but as she says, there is no clarity on who's paying for these RT-PCR tests.
Ma'am, I'd like
Mhm.
to comment here. Even if the test is
But the
free, like the
observation was, if I
process of
get it,
test,
got it
the
right,
process of
then there
getting
was a
the
like observation of different segregation of two class of people, and in the period of a pandemic, one who are contagious by the birth, and the other one who was
Mhm.
labeled as contagious because of their occupations. But if we see the past history of India, then those who are contagious by birth tend to choose such occupations which are which is labeled as contagious. So I don't see a different segregation of these people uh, in the broad tapestry of these new mode of untouchables
No,
in
Achuyt,
present
on the
context.
contrary,
That was
we
my
have
simple observation.
evidence. On the contrary, we have evidence they want to uh, delink from their traditional occupation, and move to something different. I remember, I mean, you ask these young boys, what do you want to? I want to learn driving. I don't mind becoming a driver. They may not want to do carpentry because that still has a caste, I would say,
Mhm.
origin nexus. But there are many other
Is that a
jobs
problem?
which, yeah, and the boy is telling, I want to become a driver. Even drive, in the cities, Ola, Uber drivers. So you find some point of time there was a big demand. We even had some unemployed graduates talking to us in English, driving the cab. So there are certain occupations which do not have any kind of a caste connotation. So
Uh,
especially in a city.
Ma'am, I would like to comment here.
Yeah.
Is that like whatever I have understood while doing this paper, which I'm still working on because I'm still trying to get back the ethnographic data that I'm about to lose anyway. So that is that the caste as a system, like caste as a graded hierarchy of work, caste as a inheritance, it is slightly changing in a capitalist liberal world, we can say, because as some people, as right now, I think the biggest caste group that works as a domestic worker is the OBC caste group that I have found out from a data from 2018. So it is not the lowest of the it's not a very low, it's not the AC community or the ST community, but they are, coming in front. But what happens is that the susceptibility of the employer, the employer's doubt, they have to carry the the doubts, and they are always in a position that is not very secured, I would say. And about drivers, as you have mentioned that someone is like trying to take opportunity to become a driver, while working on this, I landed upon a video where about a building in Noida which allows the drivers to use the lift, but the workers used to take a staircase. So maybe there are new hierarchies are creating. So in that hierarchies, a Zomato delivery boy or any delivery boy or a driver is maybe slightly sits slightly upper in upper position than the people who are working as a working in the domestic area. Even in case of West Bengal, where I collected the primary data, that though I have not used in this paper, in case of West Bengal, I have seen that people considers cooking to be a upper kind of an it's a
Better.
better job than cleaning the house or washing the clothes or stuff like that. So there are new modes of hierarchies being created, where though handling of those hierarchies, the fear of contagion, the fear of spoiling people's purity, that is same as it was in the caste system. But there are new hierarchies being created, and I think it's more have been created in the pandemic times in the urban space, urban domestic space. I may be wrong because I'm a student of sociology and I have very limited understanding of the field.
In fact, I mean, social stratification is so very complex. It is very difficult to teach and also understand. And what we say is, in Indian context, we talk of multiple modalities or multiple stratification system. You have the caste, you have the class, you have the religion, you have the region, you have the urban, the rural. So we have many, many different types of stratification. And each one of us will fall into multiple systems of stratification at different spaces and different points of time in our life. Anything else? Anything else? If you want to add, otherwise
Regarding
we
the
can.
black paper, black contagions,
Somebody is asking something.
is there any question for the community response to black paper?
Is there a
Question.
question?
Any question, any observation for our paper?
Oh,
Further
yes, you're asking. Yeah, for your
observations.
paper. Yeah, for your paper.
If you have, please free feel to ask or say or comment.
Tejaswini, what do we do now? She is one of the organizers, so she must tell us whether we should wind up the session.
Yes, ma'am. If there are
Tejaswini,
no
are you there?
questions anymore, then
Yeah. Should we wind up the session? There
Thank you,
doesn't
ma'am.
seem to be. Yeah,
Yes, we can do that.
yeah.
I would like to thank Professor Prema Rajagopalan and the panelists for the interesting session. And with that, we have reached the end of our discussion for day one. We will be starting our day two of the annual academic conference with a special lecture by our alumnus Pranjal, who will be speaking on the topic addressing learning loss due to school closures among children in tribal ashram school Maharashtra at 9 a.m. This will be followed by the panel Contagion and Media moderated by Professor Merin Simiraj at 10:45 a.m. Professor Semalar Selvi will then deliver a keynote at 1 p.m. on the topic of caste and COVID-19. This will be followed by the final panel of the conference, Contagion and Misinformation, moderated by Professor Kalpana at 3 p.m. This will be followed by valedictory ceremony marking the close of the conference. Hope to see you all tomorrow and have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tejaswini. Thank you very much.
Much.